Hi, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Here to do unboxing, you have to start. This device has an introductory price of 30,999 pesos. Yes, it is an exaggeratedly expensive device, although not the most expensive. On top of it, there may be some other foldables or models from other manufacturers, but it is definitely very expensive. So join me in taking it out of the box to see what's inside, although we anticipate it's going to be a simple box. But in a moment, we'll bring some guests to make the unboxing more fun. And I already have in my hands this extremely nice device as we are used to from the iPhone. Although I must be honest, the design is starting to get a little boring after so many generations with such a similar design. And obviously for price and for fame, popularity and more, it competes directly against the Galaxy S24 Ultra, although they are a little bit out of step in time, alternating a little bit. Then in a few months we will see the arrival of the Galaxy S25 Ultra, but at least on its release date, its direct competitor from Samsung is the Galaxy S24 Ultra, which as you can see comes with a very different design in terms of the corners. They are much sharper corners, but the size will be very similar, although you know Samsung is including the S Pen, which could be a major factor, and it will also include an additional intermediate zoom camera, unlike Apple, which jumps straight from 1 to 5x, whereas Samsung jumps from 1 to 3 and then to 5, so it has a little better coverage in terms of optical zoom. However, the 3x zoom camera doesn't have such a modern sensor. It's a sensor that's already a little bit outdated, so it will be very interesting to do the camera comparison between these two devices in a few days to see how they perform in real life and not only in terms of specs. Let me turn on this device to see what else comes in the box. We're already seeing that it's very little content. As you notice, nothing else comes but the cable, which fortunately is of good quality because it's braided. USB-C on both sides, the key for the tray, and that's it. There's not much more content. Obviously, it doesn't come with a case, no charger, and it only comes with these little pieces of paper. Let me take this segment to thank you to put these things back and focus now directly on the cell phone. And that's it. We've got this device set up. So what do you say we take a quick look at the changes? I don't want to focus too much on the specs because they're going to be similar to last generation. So let's focus directly on what has changed from one generation to the next. Possibly the most talked about new feature will be the new camera button that wasn't there before. This button will allow you to enter the camera with greater speed. And in fact, it's a simple press. You don't need to hold it down because, for example, in the last generation you could set the action button to enter the camera, but you need to hold down, so it would make a difference. Obviously, in this new generation we also have this button for you to configure what you want. But it's not just to enter the camera, but if you press it with a little bit of force, we're going to add controls that are for manipulating the zoom. However, it is curious because you can control the zoom there without the need to make an additional press. So in reality you don't gain speed. On the contrary, you lose speed because you have to press and then you can slide. So I don't consider the addition of this button to be very practical. Although you should know that if you press this button twice, you can change parameters. So for example, you could change the depth, the exposure, or also switch between the different camera lenses and also change styles or tone. So let's say it's a selector that you could more or less take advantage of. But I insist, for example, styles is also something that we can access directly with a touch and we can start modifying. So in this case, the same thing happens. We give a touch and we can start modifying. So it doesn't save us a lot of time, let's say. Although certainly with practice you could tap and swipe at the same time to make it look like you're doing one action, but it does require a little bit of a learning curve when you're using it. Obviously, if you finish pressing the button properly, we're going to be able to shoot the picture. So, this is one of the main new features. Yes, it's a very important change from one generation to another, but I don't consider it to be as useful as we would expect, since most options are seamlessly integrated into the interface. Besides that, it is a bit remote, so it's not as comfortable where your finger usually rests. You have to stretch it out a bit more, and it's still a bit uncomfortable that you can't hold the iPhone resting here unless you have really big hands, but my hands are a little small, so I can't reach that button. And Another novelty is that the ultra-wide camera now has one of the largest. What is this going to be useful for? Well, as a first point, to have high-resolution photographs if we access RAW mode, but it should, at least in theory, also improve the behavior in low-light conditions, which is where the iPhone tends to fail in this camera. So let's do the test and compare. Let's see, you're looking side by side. Honestly, both pictures look low in detail and noticeably high in noise. Yes, we're talking about a low light situation, but you have to remember that these devices are super expensive and honestly leave a lot to be desired in this camera. I haven't seen a major evolution. In fact, if we zoom in a hell of a lot closer, we realize that even the new generation has more noise in this ultra-wide photography. And the truth is that the level of detail is very poor, despite the fact that it integrates a higher resolution sensor. This may have some explanations. Obviously, having more pixels in a very similar size surface causes the pixels to be smaller. Therefore, less light enters them. However, most manufacturers, including Apple, merge groups of 4 so that a larger pixel is created, which we could say is roughly equivalent to the size of a pixel in the previous camera. So, it shouldn't struggle in terms of capturing illumination, but it looks like it's not very good in that regard. Now, we already saw the reference with respect to the past generation iPhone, but I want to show you now another special guest, which is the Galaxy S24 Ultra. Now, we're looking at the iPhone on the left and the Galaxy on the right, so you'll notice that Samsung, let's say, defines the details a little bit better, but I'm not an expert either. The shirt looks very noisy, although other areas of the photo are a little cleaner, but in general it looks like a better quality and more illuminated picture. But I insist, I don't consider Samsung to be an expert in that kind of photography. For that, I brought in other guests that perhaps not many know about. For starters, we brought in the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Again, we're looking on the left at the iPhone, on the right at the Xiaomi, and the difference is abysmal. Xiaomi offers much cleaner photography with more detail, and consider that Xiaomi also uses a high-resolution sensor in the ultra-wide camera, which was not the case with either the Galaxy S24 or the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So let's say they are more even in specs, these two, and still, Xiaomi's result is far superior. But another one of my favorites in photography is the Oppo Find X7 Ultra. In fact, this is my favorite for photos. And look at the result. Again, very similar to Xiaomi. We see a very clean photograph, although in this case I think the noise reduction is a little bit more exaggerated, so it removes some details in the photograph. But it's very clean and with good color compared to the iPhone photograph you have on the left, which looks very inferior, especially if we notice the closer details. So it seems that the improvement of the ultra-wide camera over the last generation doesn't really seem to be that attractive. On the contrary, it seems to take a small step backwards, but that's another change from one generation to the next. Another major improvement will be that the iPhone is now capable of recording at 120 frames per second with the main camera, whereas before it was limited to 60. And believe me, you are rarely if ever going to use this option because it is a quality that is generally used for recording very professional content. Few people are going to use it, but increasing its capabilities is always appreciated, so it's something I personally like. But if you're not going to use this feature, I wouldn't consider the change from one generation to another very attractive. But another change that you will notice a lot is that the screen of this generation is bigger. This is because they reduced the thickness of the bezels. Notice the difference in the thickness of the bezels is something I loved. The iPhone Pro Max looks super thin, very modern in this front aspect, although the dynamic island, for example, remains the same size. In the battery, we will also have differences. Apple does not communicate the exact figure, but we will find 4 more hours of video playback. Although we are talking about video stored locally. It is not streaming video, which is an activity that practically no one does, which is something that, for example, you could apply when you download movies and then watch them on a plane or something, but it's not such an everyday activity. Still, yes, there will be an improvement in battery in conjunction with more processor efficiency, but also this generation will support more charging power. Specifically, it goes up to 1 watt both wireless and wired, although that's what Apple shares in official figures. But it seems to me that if you connect a slightly more powerful charger compatible with power delivery, yes, it could give you more power. However, it still doesn't have reversible wireless charging as it did in the last generation. In that sense, I would have liked to see that evolution. And the processor is now the Apple A18 Pro, before it was the 17. So let's also test how the processor has evolved from one generation to the next. Although that was something that was always expected. In that sense, you never tend to take steps backwards. The processor almost always tends to get better and better. But for a large number of people, there won't even be a real-life difference between the performance you find in the last generation and the current generation. The difference is that this new generation will have more advanced support for running artificial intelligence models directly on the device. Although the last generation also has good capabilities, but let's say that would be the most important difference. And here we have the evolution of the processor, which now, as you can see, in multi-core reaches 8,156 points, whereas before it was very close to 7,000, so it's a significant increase that a basic user is honestly not going to notice, as I anticipated. But perhaps in video games with ray tracing you might notice it a little more, or in complex video editing, or in artificial intelligence models. In Antutu, this device reached 1,679,614 points. I must say that it's not the most powerful thing I've tested, so the GPU looks like it is not that powerful, but it is definitely a device with very good capabilities. The modem is said to have improved as well, so let's test if you can really feel that improvement in a speed test. As you can see, it seems that it did reach a little bit more, although by not doing it so simultaneously, the extra time took advantage of this device to reach higher speeds. We are going to repeat it simply to see if it really gets to have more speed, because in the initial stage it seems that the previous model reaches higher speed, and once it ends, the iPhone 16 Pro Max recovers that speed. But that's another new feature that is mentioned in this new generation. In fact, not only is it faster at downloading, but it consumes less battery, at least that in theory, but obviously we will test these devices later on. So, for now, that's it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of it as first impressions. Later on, we will have the video review and more comparisons so you can get to know them in more depth. I hope you liked this video. If you did, you know you can let me know. See you next time.